Shana Tova, everyone. Gemar Chatima Tova. A good final inscription in the book of life to you and to your loved ones. There is a strange Jewish law that applies when someone wants to be Jewish. We're supposed to send them away 3 times to prove that they're serious in their desire to be Jewish. So we tell them things like, our religion is really loaded with things that we can't do, like things we can't eat and observances we have to keep. You really don't want to be Jewish. And then we tell them that we have a disproportionate amount of days where we have to fast and we can't eat. You really don't want to be Jewish. And then the 3rd time we tell them how we are always the focus and target of hatred. You really don't want to be Jewish. And then the 4th time that they come, you say, oh, I'm so glad you're here. We'd love to make you Jewish. You made the right choice. And it's a silly rule and a silly law. It's a crazy litmus test to decide who wants to be a Jew. The comedian Modi has a much better system. He says if someone comes to the rabbi and wants to be Jewish, all you have to do is send them to Israel on an El Al plane, coach class, center seat. If they come back from that trip wanting to be Jewish, they are. Whether we follow the counsel of the Talmudic rabbis or we follow the counsel of Modi, I think it's safe to say that sometimes in our religion and sometimes in Judaism, we suffer from cognitive dissonance. Or put simpler, a place where sometimes it is so confusing to understand what Judaism wants from us, needs from us, or how we're supposed to respond in these challenging times and moments. Judaism, much like being a Zionist, can be slippery, it can be confusing, and it can be complicated. And sometimes, when addressing parts of our religion, our people, our culture, or our homeland, I can get whiplash and I can get dizzy, not knowing which direction I'm going to or coming from. Today, I want to look at a topic that is a part of the same history and is equally confusing. And I'll start with the question: how could we, the Jewish people, be threatened by hate when Jews are so widely loved? Now I'm going to share 3 sentences with you. This is the trivia portion of Yom Kippur, and you have to tell me which of these 3 sentences is true. Anti-Semitic crimes in America reached a record level during the past 2 years. Jews were the target of 58% of all hate crimes in the past 2 years. And Jews have ranked highest in the past decade and viewed most positively by Pew Research in the last 5 years. Well, the true statement is number 1, and number 2, and number 3. And knowing those incongruent facts can give me vertigo. Time magazine did a research with Pew a few years ago, and they found that the Jewish people ranked most positively for the religion most appreciated in our country. Robert Putnam, who is the author of Bowling Alone, a sociologist at Harvard University, he wrote a follow-up book from Bowling Alone called American Grace, taking a deep look at religion in America. And the religion that people in America felt least intimidated by was the Jewish religion. And in Putnam's research, he found that 80% of Americans said they would have no problem voting for a Jewish president of the United States if he or she were the best candidate. 80%. Now, those who were asked in this poll did not give the same response about Muslims, Mormons, Quakers, non-believers, and some for even Catholics. But meanwhile, when you take that statistic and you abut it to the fact that anti-Semitic incidents in the month of May alone almost quadrupled, something doesn't add up. Something isn't clear. Are we a people who are loved and respected, or are we a people who are targeted and hated? I'm a little dizzy just thinking about it. So how do we square the circle of being a group that has off-the-charts numbers of being respected and off-the-charts numbers of being targeted and hated at the very same time? Speaking of trying to square these circles and being put in conundrums, this summer I was put in one of the most challenging conundrums of my entire life. It pinned up two of the greatest loves of my life up against each other and gave me my own form of Sophie's choice. Everyone here in this synagogue knows of my deep, unwavering, and unflinching love for the state of Israel and the homeland of Israel, and I would do anything to support it. And anyone in this congregation and in my world who knows me, they also know of my unwavering love, my unflinching support, and my undying passion for ice cream. And in particular, Ben and Jerry's ice cream. So when Ben and Jerry's and its parent company, Unilever, announced its plan to succumb to the pressures of boycott, divestment, and sanctions in Israel, that created a conundrum of epic proportions for a guy like me. Deep love of ice cream, deep love of Israel. Now, to bring all of you up to speed who maybe weren't following it so closely, Unilever, which is the parent company of Ben & Jerry's, and Ben & Jerry's has an individual board of directors, decided that it would no longer sell ice cream in disputed territories of Israel. Now, disputed territories of Israel is a place that I would call Judea and Samaria. I would also eagerly call the West Bank. They call it Israeli-occupied land. So here are two pieces of fantastic irony that happened as a result of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, known as BDS. One, we end up protesting the unethical nature of boycotts by boycotting the boycotter. What does that mean? Our response was, hey, you can't boycott Israel. That's unethical. Therefore, we will boycott Ben & Jerry's. That is like telling your kid who just hit their brother, come here, you spank them, and as you're spanking them, you're telling them why hitting is wrong. It's confusing, and it doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, the plan that the board of directors came up with for stopping the sale of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in the West Bank hurt Palestinians much more than Israelis. First of all, almost all the Jews I know are lactose intolerant, so they had to keep that in consideration. Secondly, 80% of the West Bank is filled with Palestinians. So the response to stop Israel was to deny Palestinians ice cream. It doesn't make any sense. The notion of BDS is really not about Palestinian sovereignty. It's about as much denying Israel a right to exist as it is drawing attention to the conflict in this area. Germany in 2019 declared in its parliament that they will not support any form of BDS because the idea of putting stickers or labels on any item that came from Israel that said, don't buy this, was reminiscent of the terrifying Nazi campaign that was against the Jewish people led under Hitler. So Germany denied BDS because it reminds them of the core of anti-Semitism and all that it does. But at the same time, if you look to the history of boycotts and the idea of peaceful protest, there were always Jews standing shoulder to shoulder when it came with this notion of stopping things peacefully. All of us have in our mind the image of Heschel next to King marching in peace and solidarity and love. So what is it? What do we do? How do we solve this problem of BDS? First of all, most of the people who support the notion of boycott, divestment, and sanctions could probably not find Israel on a map, and that's a problem. And then there are BDS supporters who are just like their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, who they fought apartheid, and I'm proud that they did. They fought all types of sanctions against those who were downtrodden, and I'm proud that they did. They marched in Washington for the freeing of Soviet refuseniks, of Russian Jews who wanted out, and I'm proud that they did. And they try and take the same paradigm and apply it to what's happening in Israel, but it doesn't fit the same. And while that past is true, that analogy is just false and it's misleading. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is a movement at its core that has organized itself towards the focus and destruction of the right of Israel to exist and the right of the Jewish people to have a homeland. But I'm going to share with you what I think is the biggest unspoken problem with boycott, divestment, and sanctions that seems to never be talked about, but is the core of the conflict. For those who want to say we're not going to sell ice cream in the West Bank, and those who want to stop selling products throughout Europe that were branded, manufactured, or created in Israel, first of all, you have to be willing to do that for all products, which would mean that everyone would have to give up their iPhones and their computers, because Intel is headquartered in Israel now, where all of its chips are made. So if you're not willing to do that, you're not serious about BDS. And furthermore, what the notion of BDS really implies is that the entire conflict that happens between the Palestinians and the Israelis could be solved with the stroke of a pen by the Israeli government. Oh yeah, all they have to do is say, we're going to stop this thing that they call an occupation, we're going to write it on a piece of paper, and poof, it's over. As if there is no overture over the last 73 years, no 6 times in memory that we met in Washington and in Europe, in Madrid and Rye, and said, let's have peace with our neighbors. That we offered these different opportunities for people to come and to have a homeland and sovereignty, and it was rejected on 6 different occasions. It's as if there's no memory of the fact that there were wars in 48, 56, 67, 73, intifadas in 85, 91, and 2000. And that each of these overtures have been flatly, patently, unquestionably rejected. Yes, there is a conflict in the Middle East. Yes, part of the responsibility and blame lies squarely on the shoulders of the Israeli leadership and its history. But it doesn't solely lie there. And the idea that by boycott, divestment, and sanctions, we put the responsibility on one party is silly, it's thoughtless, and it's naive. Now, I will tell you that this generation of Palestinians, they have inherited a crappy fortune from their ancestors. And I'd be mad if I were them. But I'll also tell you that when rockets fall down like rain from the sky in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Sderot, and they come from Gaza, I'd like the inheritors who are upset with their inheritance to be upset with that level of terror. And when bombs are launched from Gaza and some claim whataboutism, or some claim some form of discrimination against the Jewish state, it doesn't help in the cause. It's unequal, it's unfair, and it comes back to the very same root issue of anti-Semitism. Almost every case that these continue to come up with seem to penalize the state of Israel and look to strengthen the Palestinian people through the process. There's always full condemnation and accountability for Israel, and there's always complete exoneration and explanation and clemency for the Hamas terrorists. Much of the increase that we are all seeing, that we saw during the month of May, up by 58%, and almost doubling in that month towards Jewish people, is a result of anti-Semitism that is given birth to through anti-Zionism. And let me be crystal clear. I want to be full-throated and unequivocal that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. There is no separation between the two. Just a few days ago, Congressman Richie Torres sat here in our courtyard and he said, of course anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. My constituent, Torres said, is the Dominican people. Could you imagine me saying to the Dominican people, I love the Dominican people, but I hate the Dominican Republic? It would never pass muster for any of his constituents. And we cannot claim to love the Jewish people and despise the Jewish state because we are intrinsically connected one to the next. Now, of course, our homeland can do things we disagree with. It does things that I disagree with. That's normal. I'm willing to bet that many of you in this crowd, almost all of you who are proud Americans, might take issue with some of the things going on today in the state of Texas, for example. But I bet all of you still vote. I bet most of you still eat apple pie and you pay your taxes, and we still wave our flags, even with upset for what's happening in Texas. It is not exclusive one to the next, and our hearts have many rooms able to hold all of that love and even find criticism without questioning that love. BDS is just a masquerade for anti-Semitism, which is put up as anti-Zionism. It's just another pernicious and slippery form of that hatred that is running rampant on college campuses today, stymieing our students who really just want to learn and socialize, and it's scary. Now, as sure as I'm standing here today, I can assure you that this issue did not start with ice cream, and I'm willing to bet it's not going to end with ice cream. Because Israel animosity isn't limited to boycott, divestment, and sanctions, nor is anti-Semitism. Take the news this week from the fledgling government of Lebanon, for example, which is in total disarray, which economy and infrastructure is all toppling, which is a very scary thought for Israel because we don't want Hezbollah to gain any more power. And the de facto government that is not run by Hezbollah comes to power. Its leader is named Najib Mikati. And he announced 3 days ago that he is looking forward to building relationships in order to build the country of Lebanon stronger and better than ever before. And he is willing to reach out his hand and engage in relationship with any country that can be a partner with Lebanon. Any country of the brothers and sisters of the United Nations, any country in the world, except for Israel, he said. Except for Israel. They're neighbors, they share a border, but that sure sounds like hatred to me. We seek peace, and before he even begins his reign of leadership, he proclaims that Israel isn't even welcome into the conversation. That's Israel bashing, that's anti-Zionism, and that is anti-Semitism. Now, juxtapose that a few weeks before Mikati's obnoxious statement. Just a few weeks before he said this, Dory and the kids and I were blessed to spend some time in Israel this summer. And we're leaving the airport on a Sunday noon flight on United. And we're walking through this incredible new airport in Israel. It's still new to me and still magnificent. And we get ready to board the jetway to our plane, and we look out the windows to our right and to our left. And there was our United plane that we're taking home. Just an eye shot of the other terminal were a whole load of El Al planes. But our United plane was sandwiched between two other jumbo jets, one from Emirates and one from Etihad. I had to wipe my eyes twice. I couldn't believe it. Arab countries with Arab sovereignty were sending their aircraft to Israel. Etihad Airlines and United Arab Emirates Airlines were landing in Israel. So I just told you about Mikati and what he said about Lebanon and making peace with Israel. And at the same time, the very same time, there is a United Arab Emirates plane next to an Etihad plane next to my plane in the land of Israel. So what is it? Bob Picard told me just the other night when we were here with Richie Torres that he got some statistics from the AJC, an institution that he's very involved in and does amazing work for our community. And he said that now that we have celebrated 1 year since the Abraham Accords, we just had the anniversary, that Arab countries who never had a relationship with Israel before in Israel now can boast 57 different agreements, pacts, and treaties. 57. Those are not business relationships between two entities. Those are between the government and state of Israel and other countries that didn't have a relationship a year ago. And this, by the way, is during a pandemic. That number will rise for sure. And that is an amazing statistic and an amazing feat. So here you are, you have Mikati telling us anyone but Israel, and then the Emirates and Etihad are landing in Israel. And we see in 1 year during a pandemic, 57 pacts between countries like Bahrain, Oman, UAE, Morocco, and more. And then at the United Nations, during the same time of the pandemic when 56 pacts were made, the United Nations condemned Israel during the past year 17 times. During a pandemic, the same pandemic as 56 pacts, Israel was condemned 17 times. The entire brotherhood and sisterhood of nations was condemned, besides Israel, 6 times. That means every other country in the world, there were only 6 other condemnations made in the past year. That includes the likes of Iran, Syria, North Korea, China, Afghanistan. And Israel is 17 times, and collectively all the other countries are 6. Are we loved or are we hated? I can find valid proof for both, and I will tell you, I am perplexed. These past few years, we have seen increased hatred towards many groups. And we've seen increased activism as a result of that hatred. After the murder of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter rose to prominence again. And leading the white efforts for Black Lives Matter were many Jewish people. Because let's face it, an attack on an innocent African-American person is an affront on all peoples. And we as Jews, we stand for justice. And when nasty rumors about COVID stemming from China purposefully and meanly circulated, hate crimes towards Asian Americans increased dramatically. At this temple, I preached loudly and proudly about how Bergen County is blessed with a large Asian American population, and that we stand shoulder to shoulder with our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our classmates, our store owners, who are innocent victims of bias hate against Asians. Because let's face it, an attack on an innocent Asian American is an affront on all peoples, and we Jews proudly stand for justice. And then, when a rabbi in Boston was jumped this summer and beaten within inches of his life, and when a yeshiva boy was gunned down just a few weeks ago in Denver, or a Jewish man was beaten to a pulp in Beverly Hills, it didn't even make the news. Because let's face it, an attack on a Jewish innocent person is, well, it's an attack on a Jewish person. What does the world do with that? Asian hate isn't strictly an Asian issue. Black hate isn't strictly a black issue. But for some reason, Jewish hate is. Why? The same Jewish supporters and groups that proudly marched to stop Asian hate and that demanded that Black Lives Matter marched, they were silent when attacks happened against Jews. And some of these same groups that decried the treatment of Palestinians were soundless. Not a peep was heard when bombs were raining down over Tel Aviv and Netanya this May. Why is it that sometimes Jewish blood is so damn cheap? And why are we, the Jewish tribe, so respected, so revered, and at the very same time, we're not thought of or considered at all? Universities and workplaces and municipalities, in the wake of all of this social justice, they've announced their intolerance towards any form of hate, and I think it's wonderful. But as Bret Stephens wrote, if there's a massive online campaign of allyship with Jews, I've seemed to miss it. If corporate executives have sent out workplace memos expressing concern for the safety of Jewish employees, Stephens said, I didn't get the memo. And neither did I. If academic associations have issued public letters denouncing the use of anti-Semitic tropes by pro-Palestinian activists, I missed that memo too. It's a very curious silence when it comes to the Jewish people. In the land of inclusiveness, Jews are denied some level of inclusion. But at the same time, we are denied very little in the world. Look at us. Look at how far we've come. Look at what we have at our disposal. What can we say that we are denied from? Are we this or are we that? We seem to be punching up and punching down at the very same time. I want to share a personal story with you. In our home, we have an additional member of our family who has lived with us for the last 5 years. Her name is Juliet, and we lovingly call her Jules. She helps with everything in our house. She helps with cooking. She helps with tidying up the house. She helps with laundry, helps walking the dogs. When the kids were little, she was a built-in babysitter. Everyone in our house and everyone who's been blessed to spend time with Juliet and Jules loves her. She is a part of the fabric of our family. And for almost every single one of our meals, we eat together, the five of us, Dory, me, Eve, Elias, and Jules. And one random meal during the pandemic, when we were blessed to all be eating together regularly, we started talking about one of the attacks that happened to the Jewish people that I mentioned just a few minutes ago. And I said something without thinking very much to the effect of, God, we're so hated and discriminated against. And Jules, a black woman from Grenada, said nothing. But she didn't need to. Her face said it all. Her facial expression said, hold on a second. You live in this house. Your tribe is not denied jobs anywhere. You're talking about colleges for your kids, and not once does religion interfere with any of those acceptance rates, except maybe at Brigham Young. You drive a nice car, you live in an affluent neighborhood, and you're claiming victimhood? Really? I can tell you and your kids something about victimhood. She never said those words, but that's what I read on her face. And she is absolutely right. And she is absolutely wrong. She's right because heads of industry and retail and food and aerospace and media and finance are proudly Jewish. We have ascended the ranks in a way no one could have thought possible in just 60 years. 2% of Jews represent the population of America, but we're close to 10% in Congress for the last 20 years. No other group is represented that disproportionately. She's right, because every major city in America has a Holocaust museum. She's right because more than 200 four-year degree granting universities in this country have a Jewish studies program that people can minor in and some can major in. So what are we denied as a Jewish people? As Robert Putnam told us, we have arrived and we are respected. The facts are irrefutable. But Jules is wrong. Jules is wrong because when you walk into any evangelical church in North America, if you visit any Catholic cathedral in the Northeast or the Southwest, I want you to tell me how many police officers are standing there guarding it, both on days of worship and days of the week. Are they spending 20% of their annual budget like we are on security? I doubt it. Did they have police with machine guns out and trained on their campus just because we had congresspeople who weren't even Jewish but support the state of Israel, Republicans and Democrats, that warranted police to come out with machine guns as a form of protection? Would that happen at the church? Would that happen at the cathedral? Would that happen at the local Y? Do they have to lobby Congress for added security the way that we do? When I come in and I see all the police and security that are here, I am in that same dizzying mode of being thankful to God that we have the resources here and the relationships with our security teams and our police that afford that to us, and angry at God that it's the reality that we have to absorb. And it's a strange reality where something doesn't add up. Professor Deborah Lipstadt of Emory, who was Dory's teacher, who has graced our temple many times, including during the high holidays. She has recently been appointed as the anti-Semitism czar in America, and she lasers in on this conundrum as we start to feel it, as to what we are. How can we be the target of hate when we are so respected and appreciated? And what is it that we are? Deborah Lipstadt says, the radical left refracts their views through two lenses: ethnicity and class. And it's in that image that they see Jews overall as white, and they see Jews as privileged. And then they say, how could someone who's white and how can someone who's privileged be the victim of any hate? And those who are slinging the hatred towards Israel with tools like boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or with things that are guised up as anti-Zionism, but they say is an anti-Semitism, but then they make comments like the Benjamins or compare moments in society to wearing yellow stars like it was in Europe. They say, hey, you can't say that about me. I'm a fighter. I fight for the downtrodden, for inequality. I'm fighting for the persecuted. I could never say something that is a form of hatred. So they put themselves and us in this incredible conundrum. And meanwhile, when you see that view from some in the radical left, you then say, well, what does the radical right say? It's pretty easy. They don't see us as white at all. They see the Jews in this evil, cartoonish depiction that's thirsty for money and willing to do anything to advance their cause with no care of what it does to others. There's one place where the radical right and the radical left seem to agree, and that is in their disdain for the Jewish soul. So as my mother would say, are we coming or are we going? Are we privileged and are we impervious? Or are we less than and faulty? I am so damn confused. And part of this challenge comes in the uniqueness that is us as the Jew. We are a Jew and we are a religion. We are a Jew and we are a people. We are a Jew and we are a culture. As a religion, we are open to any soul who seeks to join us in faith and prayer and belief. As a religion, we are comprised of men and women, straight and gay, people of color, people who are born and people who choose to be part of our faith. We're open to everyone. As a people, we are connected to a sacred land, and that land is called Boca Raton. And the other land, of course, is called Israel. And we have historical connections to both of them. Our people are indigenous to those places. And in both of those places, they love to bargain. They always know what's right. They'll fight for their survival, and they'll all eat dinner at 4:30. And we are a culture. Because as Jews, we fight for the oppressed in South Africa. We lobby for the release of Jews in Russia. And we are a tribe that is connected to a calendar, whether we pray 3 times a day or 3 times a year. We are bound to each other by common likes and things that we share, like whitefish and hummus and herring and babka. And we all speak a shared language, because everyone in this room knows what we mean when we say kvetch, and we say shalom, and we say shlep, and we say nachas, and we say shul. But because of our identity, and because it's not tied to any one of these 3 things, whether a religion, a culture, or a land, we are not necessarily all of those things. Sometimes we're hated for our religion, sometimes we're despised for our land, and sometimes we're loathed for our culture. And at other times, we are respected for our faith. Other times we are valued for our land, and other times we are loved for our culture. It doesn't fit neatly into one box that allows us all the forms to check. It is a very strange feeling to be so loved and so reviled by some of the same groups of people at the same time. Some people in this room would just rather assume that they're hated all the time. And they'd just rather build up walls and be on defense. I would call that fatalist and an imprudent pathway forward. And some in this room would like to believe that the hate is pointed elsewhere, and they enjoy the fruits of happiness and prospects for peace always. And I would call those people naive, and that is an imprudent pathway forward. There are parts of our life that, like someone who wants to be Jewish, seem to have a strong sense of dissonance, a lack of harmony or reason to their definition. And the clash at times makes it hard and makes it dizzying. Rabbi Simcha Bunim used to walk around the world with 2 pieces of paper in his right and left pocket, respectively. In his left pocket, he would pull out the paper regularly and look at it and says, "You are dust, you came from dust, you will return to dust." And he would put that piece of paper back as a moment to be humbled. And then he'd pull out the other piece of paper and say, "The world was created just for me." And he'd pull out that other piece of paper regularly to be exalted. We Jews live a dual narrative of blessings and curse, of advantage and of trauma. And if you're like me, there's a part of you that is surprised, and there's another part of you that's surprised that you're surprised. Rabbi David Stern taught, we're not Jews because of anti-Semitism. We're not Jews because of Hitler or even despite of him. We're Jews because of God, Torah, because of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, because of justice and compassion, because of human dignity and grace. We're Jews because of history and song and tzedakah, Shabbat, Yom Kippur, and Kugel. We are Jews for the stranger that waits for us at our holiday table. I hate sermons like this. I hate sermons about anti-Semitism. I hate hearing them, and I hate giving them. I like a sermon that calls us to action. I like a sermon that gives us something to digest through teaching and incorporate into our lives and to make it better. And this is a hard topic to do that, but it would be a form of malpractice to not discuss it. So I've worked hard on things that we can do to take away from this day. The first thing we can do is take the rise in anti-Semitism very seriously. And where we see it, and when we see it, we can call it out. And like the Supreme Court Justice said, sometimes you just know it when you see it and you feel it. We should express it. And we can, and we should demand the very same call out from our friends, our family, and those in our social networks. And if our friends and our family and those in their social networks are silent in the face of anti-Semitism, we need to think long and hard about their friendship. Secondly, I assure you that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism lives and breathes in every political party and in every religion I can think of. Do not use anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism as a weapon to demonize your enemies or to promote your political affiliation. It's futile, it's silly, it's naive, and it will backfire. And lastly, the rise of anti-Semitism is real. There is what for us to be afraid of, but there is also plenty for us to appreciate, to enjoy, and to celebrate. Whether it's in our homeland, whether it's accords that are bearing fruit, whether it's statistics that show a level of acceptance and respect and love that show us how far we've come in such a short time, we are equally distant to the dates of 1939 in Europe and to the date of that utopian existence that we strive for daily. All of Judaism is like Rabbi Bunam's 2 pieces of paper in his pockets. We live in the balance. Today is a day that puts us on the scales where we seek balance between life and death, good and bad, right and wrong. Let us strive for that sense of balance, and may it grant all of us the peace we deserve for us, for our people, and for our homeland. Gemar Chatima Tova, a good inscription in the Book of Life.